Good morning and welcome to what's going to be hopefully an insightful few presentations from the four of us in terms of getting a product from concept to shelf. I'm Nick Hay, Managing Director of Fowler Welch. We're a distribution business. In a minute I'm going to take you through a few very short slides which will hopefully explain why we're here, and then hand over to Adrian, then Simon, then Claire, each of whom are going to give you some of their thoughts and insight in terms of getting products from concept to shelf. So I hope you find it interesting and insightful. The key thing for all of us is to grow our businesses, hence the picture of an acorn. And the industry we work in, the food industry, is incredibly exciting, incredibly innovative, and it's an absolute pleasure to provide services to food manufacturers within the UK. And growth is what we're after, and we've recognised over the last few years that growth is best achieved by working closely with manufacturers and trying to be part of the solution in getting their product from concept to shelf, as opposed to just providing a service, moving things from A to B. At times, however, and this picture's supposed to represent what we see as a symbiotic relationship, we are very much the little bird feeding in the mouth of a crocodile. But the reality is, it is only by working closely with the people who we serve that we can grow as a business. And so it's that symbiotic relationship of understanding what food manufacturers need and providing solutions that enables us to grow and hopefully enables our customers to grow as well. So the way we've done that over the last few years is in many ways, and I've pulled 5 out here. Starting at the top, 2 years ago we started a joint venture called ISS, which is Integrated Service Solutions, based on our site in Kent. This year that business will pack somewhere in the region of 8 million cases of fresh produce for the UK retail market. That joint venture is with a supplier of produce to the UK's retailers, and they came to us. They wanted to provide a more efficient supply chain, and together we developed that joint venture, and we're now, as I say, delivering 8 million cases per annum of produce to the UK market. Working round VMI, we've got a number of manufacturers we're working with where we actually provide a solution where we store the raw materials that they need for their production, and they call those off on a daily basis, and we manage that and deliver that into their production locations on a day-to-day basis. In our ambient operation, we've developed a co-packing capability, so we're now reconfiguring cases, stretch wrapping, labelling, etc. For a number of manufacturers at our ambient DC in Hayward near Manchester. We've developed some bespoke fleet, so later this year we'll have some new trailers that will take to the road for Mars. Those trailers are capable of operating as a standard trailer, but also can be automatically loaded and unloaded, all 26 pallets in a single pull. So that's really good for Mars in terms of clearing the factory, very efficient, but also means that we can use that fleet for other operations as well as just for clearing their factory. And the last example is LTL. We've got a number of ambient customers who've come to us with requirements for smaller deliveries to smaller wholesalers and retailers, and we've developed a solution for a number of our manufacturing customers in the ambient business at Hayward, and we're now delivering on a fleet of rigids into that new market. So they're just 5 examples of where we've tried to listen to what our customers need and design solutions that will deliver value to them and help them grow and get product to the shelf. So I'm now going to hand over to Adrian, who's going to talk about Rondinini.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to stand up if you don't mind. So I'm going to talk to you about how to win a listing in a retailer. Okay? And we obviously have to start with our idea. So, my idea is Donald Trump sauce and Clinton ketchup. So how am I going to go about getting this product listed? Well, the first thing that we have to remember is actually we need a consumer. And it all starts, our journey starts with the consumer. Who is the consumer? In the case of the Donald Trump sauce, it's not going to be Mexicans. It might not be Muslims. It probably won't be women. So it's quite a difficult task. Who is it? Who are they? And you need to answer that question because it's fundamental to understanding and processing your presentation. What's the customer decision tree going to be? And why are they going to choose your product versus a competitor's? You have to know your buyer, and you have to remember that the buyer of the retailer is actually a facilitator to your consumer. So there's a big difference because the buyer is helping you connect to your consumer. So you have to know your consumer and know the market that you're playing in. Back your story up with facts, but be precise. There are a couple of key do's and don'ts. Do use, and don't be scared to use, consumer panels. You know, you've heard the slogan, 8 out of 10 cats prefer it. Test it. Make sure that you've got robust data to be able to present back to the retailer that says, this is my information, it's robustly tested by consumer panels. Use tracking data. There's lots of really good services out there. Nielsen, World Panel, Kantar, and IRI are just some of them. Don't make your presentations too long. There's nothing worse than standing in front of a buyer reading the Gospel according to Luke and watching him want to jump himself out the window. Don't gossip and underestimate your competitors. Italians are really good at that, you know. They'll tell you all the time, oh, my pastas are better than your pasta. No, actually, the truth is, do not talk about your competitors. It's a big no-no. And don't exaggerate your sales. Very often, you can be carried away by saying that you're going to sell 1 million cases a week. And the buyers tend to remember that. And when they say, actually, Mr. DeVito, you've only sold 3, you're in trouble. You have to think about how your product looks on shelf. So someone in the Lindt chocolate factory came up with an idea of putting a gold egg together with long ears in the shape of a bunny. And then they had to give it to merchandising and say, well, now you go and merchandise it on shelf. And if you remember throughout Easter, when you went around retail, it looks really good on shelf. All the top 4 retailers use shelf-ready packaging. And that's your suit. It's how your product sits on the shelf, how it looks. You have to think about that because it's really, really important. Where will the product sit in store? Particularly if you're thinking about a new product to market, you've got to make sure that you know how to where it's going to be in terms of the actual fixtures, because if you put it in the wrong part of the store, it's not going to work. And also, when can you launch it? There's no point in launching presidential sauces in January next year when the elections are over. The news will be gone. Having a Christmas product that you then can't launch until Easter isn't going to work. So remember when you can launch it. 7,500 products were delisted from retail last year, and space is at a premium. So you need to remember that you've got to keep your packaging tight and keep the space that it occupies on shelf very effectively. And that's it. Thank you. I'm going to hold you on it, Simon.
Hi, everyone. So I'm from a company called Winterbotham Derby. Just a very quick introduction to say Winterbotham Derby sell olives, continental products, cured meats, those kind of products. And we launch around 150 products every year into supermarkets. The majority of those are own label. Some of them are branded. So we have quite a good overview, I guess, of how it is to bring a product to market and to shelf. A couple of points I want to make. So the first one is be really, really clear what you're selling. It sounds completely obvious, but I think selling to a supermarket buyer isn't like persuading them what they're going to eat for dinner. It's not just about is it a tasty product. It's a lot about what's the concept behind it, what's it bringing to the category, what's it adding to the category. Will it enhance their category? So I've given an example here. It's one of our a recent-ish launch for us is Spanish omelettes, and obviously they're nice omelettes. But the key, I guess, is that they've tapped into a few trends in the marketplace. So protein is a big trend. Eggs are in big growth. You probably all know gym bunnies in your respective offices who have huge quantities of eggs every morning, and also reducing fat and carbs are trends as well. So when you compare an omelette to a quiche, it ticks a lot of those boxes, and that was part of our sell-in for that product, and they've been really, really successful products. So it's not just about saying this is a great tasting omelette, it's about why are people going to buy that, and why is it going to enhance the category. Which brings me on to this point about category growth. So I think one of the things I always think when I go into a room and sell to a buyer is it's not about me, it's about them. It's a little bit like speed dating advice, and they only care about their category and the growth of their category. They don't really care about the success of your product unless you're much more charming than I am. And it's really important to tell that story about how your product's going to grow the category. Think a little bit about why it's better than what's there already. I completely agree with Adrian's point about not gossiping about other people's products, but you've got to make a case for why your product should be there, and that's got to be very compelling for them. Remember, they've got to take something out. Why would they do that? That's what you need to get across. I wanted to talk a little bit as well about not just focusing on launch. I think a lot of startup businesses in particular are guilty of being incredibly ecstatic about when they get their first launch, which I don't blame them, because it's been a very hard road to get there. But a huge proportion of products fail after launch, and I think we found that the first 12 weeks is really, really key. So a lot of buyers will have in their minds that 12-week window to prove yourself as a product. So I'd encourage you to put a huge amount of energy into that first 12 weeks. Don't think about brand building kind of marketing. Think about anything you can do that will help the product sell in that period. And the key is you need to get into as many consumers' hands as possible. So this is the time to do sampling, to at point of sale. If you can flash your product, have stickers on there. If you can have shelf edge label flashes, anything that attracts people's attention and gets people to try the product and buy the product. So really, really focus on that first 12 weeks. Okay, I'll hand over to Claire.
Thank you. I'll stand up as well, a bit small. So my name's Claire Martinson. I'm the founder of Breckland Orchard, and you can see there we make soft drinks. Before starting Breckland Orchard, I worked for Mars. So I actually worked for Mars for 12 years, worked on lots of their categories. So it's been an interesting journey, actually, taking all those learnings from working from a really big multinational and distilling them down into what still is a sort of small startup. My experience with Mars was entirely on the supermarket size. So I've taken a completely different track with this business and focusing entirely on food service. So slightly different route to market, but I think many of the lessons are really the same. So the first thing I would say is that being small and not having a budget, and certainly not having the big marketing budgets that Mars would have had launching a product, doesn't necessarily put you at a disadvantage. I would argue it makes you think more creatively, be more nimble. So lots of the things that we would have done as practice, such as haul tests, really testing out what the product looked like on shelf, that's entirely possible to do on a much smaller scale. Go into a local supermarket, go into a local cafe and ask, if you can put your products on the shelf, and that'll give you a really good idea how they stand out, what they look like against competitors' products, and you can certainly get a really good idea. If your product literally has no standout from 2-3 meters back, it isn't going to sell. I was taught this lesson really early on, and I think it's absolutely essential when you're developing new products. When you are presenting to buyers, you do need a rhino skin. So be prepared for lots of knockbacks, lots of challenges. And yes, you might think it's the best thing in the world, but just kind of toughen up and be prepared for some challenges. And that's good. That makes it more rewarding. And if you thought through what all those challenges are going to be, then you're going to probably have a slightly thinner rhino skin. And the last thing, really, I guess following on from what the guys have said, having a clear point of difference. So be absolutely clear about what that point of difference is. And it's no good saying it tastes better than everything else, because everybody is going to say that. I don't think anyone really develops a product in food and drink that doesn't taste good. So when you know that point of difference, absolutely hammer it home. Don't be, afraid to be absolutely clear. And I think although it might be really clear to you as a person, to the buyers, to consumers, it's not. So one of our points of difference is, we don't sell to the supermarkets and focus entirely on food service. And that message is banged home on all the outer packaging, on all the communications, on our emails, because we really, really want people to know that is a key point of difference. And last one, just test. It isn't rocket science. If something isn't working, pull it back. Test it with friends and family, but test it wider as well. Test it with strangers. When I set up my business, I literally camped out in a local deli for the day, and every single person that came through the door, I tested my product on, got the feedback, and as a result of that, went back, reformulated and developed it. And really, you can't speak to too many people, you can't test it on too many people, and that will give you the sort of evidence, the ammunition to be really confident when you do go to market.
Thanks, Claire. So just before we... let you take your applause. Just before we throw it to the floor for any questions, which Michael's going to coordinate for us, and we'll have a roving mic if anyone does have any questions for any of the guys here. We've put a summary up there of the steps in terms of moving a product from concept to shelf. Just pulling out a few bits from what the guys have said. I think for me, really interesting comment from Adrian in particular, that the buyer's a facilitator. I think quite often, certainly I don't spend a lot of time dealing with retail buyers, but whenever you go to a relationship meeting with somebody, you quite often go in there expecting to be beaten up or expecting to have a difficult time. And actually, I think the insight that your buyer is a facilitator for your product has really resonated with me. From Simon, I think the point around celebrating sales is absolutely true. I think it's the journey is only halfway there when you actually get a product listed, and again, some great insight. And Claire, I think the point of difference absolutely it rings true for all of us. So over to everyone who sat here. Any questions for any of the four of us on the stage?
I'm sure some of us must have some questions. Well, one thing that occurred to me, if I may ask a question, Adrian, you highlighted that 7,500 products have been delisted in the last 12 months or so. Do you think the behaviour of the major retailers is going to change anytime soon, or are they sort of committed to that approach?
I think that... Can you hear me? Sorry. I think absolutely that's the continuing trend, and so it's harder. You have to make sure that the space that you occupy is working harder. There's no question that the discounters have had a material impact that's not going to go away in terms of how our shopping habits are being changed. And actually, in the case of ketchup, I think I remember hearing that one particular retailer was selling 28 different versions of tomato ketchup versus Aldi, who was selling 2. So, we've got quite some way to go. We need to make sure that what we do put on shelf, it works, and we use that space accurately.
And if you're developing a product, do you think that simplicity, actually going to the buyer and saying, I've not got 28 different versions of this product, I've got a very simple format, will that help get a listing?
Using data, using insight to show that your product will make the difference on shelf. I think what we're going to see as well is a lot more retailers asking for exclusivity of certain ideas, particularly new to market. So we're seeing that already with some retailers asking for exclusive on innovation, because that product that you introduce, gives a reason for consumers to come into the store. And if you've actually got data that supports that says, look, you know what, put this on shelf, it will make the difference, then the buyers will buy into that story.
Can I just come in?
Simon.
Sorry, can I just come in on that point about duplication? And definitely, I think retailers are rationalising their ranges at the moment. That's the trend, and it has been led by discounters. I think it's really important for suppliers to emphasise where their product does do something different. Example for us is and chorizo. So we sell probably about 60 different product lines just of chorizo in the market, which sounds like a hell of a lot and is quite a lot. But a lot of those products do a really different job for the consumer, and I think that the key is don't put 2 products on shelf that do the exact same job. If you've got a sliced chorizo and a cooking chorizo, and one somebody puts in a sandwich and one of them somebody cooks a meal with, those are different. But you've got to be clear about, are you serving a different occasion? Are you attracting a different consumer? What are you doing with that product?
And have you seen a similar trend in food service at all, Claire, in terms of product sizes and that kind of thing?
Yeah, certainly, absolutely. People are running on tighter ranges. I think in food service, then it's more about points of difference, and that becomes really, really key. Certainly thinking about their balance of big and small suppliers has been quite key as well. How do you bring innovation in to some fairly static categories? And it's absolutely true. The supermarket shelves are absolutely morphing and changing, as with new innovation, they've got to find the space from somewhere, and that means culling categories that aren't performing. So it is a major thought. One thing to kind of add to the debate is, and one thing that sometimes people don't always think about it, is actually case configurations, like how big your case counts are. And sometimes going to a smaller case count can actually help your case going into the supermarkets, particularly where your product will take a single facing rather than a case configuration of a 3 facing. You might want to have one product in 3 different flavours rather than just one product, one flavour. And that a lot of thought at that early stage can really help the selling and help how it sells off shelf as well.
And Nick, are those changes in SKUs and pack sizes affecting your approach in terms of distribution?
Yeah, very much so. Tulip are a large customer of ours who we're currently reconfiguring pack sizes exactly as Claire describes. They've got a single pack size that isn't suitable for all their customers, so we reconfigure those on a daily basis.
I'm conscious I'm hogging the mic. Gentleman here, if you'd be kind enough to just say where you're from, sir, when you ask your question.
Hi there, guys. Thanks for your insights already. I'm a branding marketing agency MD and sacked it all in to start a food product. And I've got what I believe is a new category, kind of classic sort of thing. Advice on innovation and then taking into manufacture. So branding and marketing I'm fairly up to do with, but it's the actual manufacture and taking it to market, especially if it's a new category. So the first question is selling that into someone where you don't necessarily have a huge amount of insight, maybe a lot of testing, but there's no precedent. And secondly, that first conversation with a manufacturer to say, right, I've got something new, how do I start to broach that and stagger the production?
Yeah, so just to answer the first point first, in terms of selling in a new category, so we had that experience with olives and antipasti. So we were selling chilled olives to retailers, and that was actually the first time that had been done in the world, bizarrely, and we had to persuade them to take away some space from potato salads and coleslaws. This is about 15 years ago, and put olives in that chilled fixture. It's really bloody difficult to persuade a retailer to launch a new category. They're very category focused, and they're quite traditionally set up still. I think it's starting to change. I think the absolute key is to show massive confidence in your product. Get in there, and then, like I was saying about the first 12 weeks, just back it, prove it works somewhere. Just if you can persuade one person to list it and prove it, you've got your case study, and then it can really, really spread like wildfire after that. In terms of the selling in, because you almost have to sell into the manufacturer as well. That's the position you're in? I'd look at, again, think it's about them, it's not about you. So one of the things we've done in the past is really learn about the manufacturer. What are their problems? They're probably facing some problems. It might be that what they're traditionally producing is stagnant market, or it's becoming a commoditized market and their margins are starting to erode. Can you offer them, the hope that your product might add value for them? Can they make more money out of your product than potentially what they're producing at the moment? So some kind of incentive for them to see a future in it. I'd say that'd be one piece of advice.
Thanks. I think that in our business we had a product. We have a product called Toscana, which is a microwavable pasta pouch, and we did some consumer research on it. Customers got it. Our issue was that actually it was new to category. There was no precedent for it on shelf, and the buying tree in the retailer pushed us to dry pasta buyer, who really liked the idea, and he launched it next to dry pasta. But in fact, it's a convenience product. It shouldn't sit in the pasta fixture. So we were able to convince the retailer to actually trial it in snacks, which is where the product should be. And there was a huge uplift in sales. And as a result of that, the distribution of the Toscana brand has increased. And I think that on that journey, our manufacturing partner, we're actually, we had to explain to them the reasons why our projected sales were not going to be as good as they originally were. You need to be confident. You need to be able to say this will work if it goes into the right part of the fixture. And it is very difficult with innovation. But you may have invented the Cadbury's cream egg. I'm not sure, but someone out there, there's always going to be something new to the market, and we lap it up as consumers. We want those new things. So don't be discouraged by it at all.
Sorry, I just remembered one other thing I think is useful is online retailers have a lot more space. So Ocado is a great place to launch new product, and the other great thing about launching online is that it's a lot more fluid, the categories. You can target specific people with your product. You don't have to rely on them visiting the right part of the store. So I'd really recommend, I don't know if it's an ambient product or a chill product, but speaking to Ocado and the likes of Amazon as well, and seeing if you can prove concept online.
Yeah, so the only thing I was going to say as well is don't be kind of greedy and think you're going to go nationwide. I wouldn't be afraid to start small and just do test market in 6 stores and roll it up, fairly quickly, 30, 60, 90 or whatever. But I think it's about finding the right sponsor sometimes as well within the retailer, and you need to find the right person who already kind of believes in it too and will really kind of push down barriers for you. And it might take talking to a few people to find that right person.
Any other questions? If not, I've got another one for the panel. As I understand it, both Rondinini and Winterbotham, you tend to import a lot of products from Italy and the continent generally. Do you ever find that you have a product that's been highly successful in a category in Italy or France or somewhere, and your manufacturing partner is sort of determined to see the same success in the UK, and the UK market is very different? Is it often a lot of adaptation that has to be taken into account?
Yeah, I'm sure we've both got a lot of stories about this, but like one example for us is soprasado, which is a kind of think of it as a spreadable chorizo, so it's a Spanish product, and we buy ours from Mallorca, and it's a fantastic product, lovely product, and massive in its home market, but it hasn't ever worked for us really. We've tried it in a few different incarnations, so that's a fail one. And then we've got a new product, a new brand called Umi coming, and which we haven't launched yet, and that's an adaptation of a Spanish product, which definitely wouldn't work in the UK, and we've kind of changed the whole positioning of that product and made some product changes. So definitely the case, yeah.
We came to the market with gnocchi, and I remember going to Sainsbury's the very first time to show that product, and the buyer was saying, "This gnocchi stuff, it's a potato. It's not pasta." I said, "Yeah, but trust me, in Italy, there's lots of Italians buying it. You know, if you put it on the shelf." And he didn't want to know. He was a lovely gentleman by the name of Les Rouse. And Delia Smith actually did a campaign for Sainsbury's, and she put gnocchi in the recipe. And the buyer called me up and he said, "You know that gnocchi you're trying to sell me? Can you get me 2 containers, because it's going on television next week?" And sometimes you do need luck, and our responsibility as food importers is actually to pick up the trends that we see in Europe and migrate them to retail and indeed food service. So it's important to actually, not be disheartened when they can't pronounce it. And we were selling prostitutos for several years to UK retail, and of course prosciutto is now on most menus across the UK. So.
Nick, I was going to ask you, because one thing that Adrian mentioned was shelf-ready packaging, of course, which has been a very, very big trend. As a distribution company, do you have any learnings or insight which would help companies, secure a listing? Because quite often, obviously, people concentrate on developing a fantastic product. Claire's talked about how you do that and you test that. But in terms of actually meeting the requirements of the retailer, so they like your product, but presenting it to them in a way that will work within their distribution channel and their store. What are the thoughts you have there?
That's a question. I'm still stuck on the prosciutto. I think there's always or can often be a conflict between what looks good on shelf and what works well in the supply chain. And shelf-ready packaging is a great example of where it's a great idea, but if you stack it too high, it won't get to the retailer and you get all sorts of rejections. So the key thing for me in terms of shelf-ready packaging specifically is making sure that people listen, that they don't get so hung up on the marketing or the placing the product on the shelf, but actually think about the whole supply chain and the impact of that packaging throughout the supply chain. So it's about communication, but being open, and you can end up with businesses that are so marketing-led that they don't stop and think about the practicalities, and there is a balance between the two.
Okay. Any more questions, anyone from the floor? Got a question to ask? We've talked a bit about the impact of the discounters. Everybody thinks that is going to continue to be a major factor in the market. In food service, the food service sector looks to be growing, is predicted to grow more quickly than the retail sector. As food producers, where do you think the biggest opportunity in the market is? Is it still with the established retailers? Would you back the discounters, or should people be thinking about maybe innovating and launching products into food service?
I think that's there's no question that the retailers need to find their own space in the market. They're not going anywhere. The top 4 retailers are very good at being accessible to all consumers. The food service groups are also trendsetters. So we're seeing, particularly in the Italian world, they're not as scared or adverse to put new products on the menu. And those products will migrate through to retail. And the advantage that the core retailers have over discounters is that they carry more SKUs, and therefore they're more adapted at trying new products or migrating existing products into new packaging formats. So for us, it's about growing the categories that we're in and making sure that we listen to our consumers and adapt our pricing models so that we remain competitive with the discounters within the top 4 retailers.
So I would say at the minute, food service is an incredibly exciting place to be, and there's kind of 2, I guess, really good growth things coming through. And the first one is the rise of coffee shops, which are just growing at a phenomenal rate, continue to do. And there's big chains growing, but there's lots of independents growing as well. And I think when you just see the stats about the number of people who sort of go out their office, no longer make tea and coffee in the office, go out to buy in a coffee shop and then bring it back in, that's really amazing. And the second one is that really sort of rise in the casual dining sector, so sort of where a meal is costing between under £15. So the sort of burger bars, Byron burgers, and a whole plethora of casual dinings that really morphing and mushrooming, and the amount of people now eating their meals out of home. And for me in my market, that's an incredibly exciting opportunity, and it's just the number of outlets opening a year is unbelievable. So it's a really, really growth market, food service for sure.
The only thing I'd add to that is also a little bit on the same convenience kind of trend is don't rule out players like HelloFresh and these home delivery meal kit kind of operators, and also people like Just Eat and Deliveroo, to see how those businesses evolve and whether they add other elements to their offering. I think we need to keep an eye on that.
Nick, Simon's mentioned going the online route a couple of times now. Are there any learnings there for food brands when they decide to look down that route as a way to market in terms of distribution?
Each route to market definitely has different dynamics in terms of the stock that you need to hold, the lead times, and the physical route to market. Ultimately, the critical mass that each of those routes to market has will drive the cost. So I think one piece of advice I'd give to people who are looking at the markets is don't make assumptions about the cost of distribution to the different markets that there are, whether that be home delivery, food service or retail. They are very different, have different dynamics. Also, don't assume that the high volume ones are necessarily the cheapest. It is all about the very bespoke dynamics of each of those markets.
I think we have time for one more question. If somebody on the floor must have a question. Our panel have answered all your queries, so you now feel confident about going to market with your new product and getting a listing. Anybody, anything they'd like to add? Any lessons we've maybe not covered, or any thoughts that have occurred as we've gone through the session? Oh, go on, Claire.
The thing I would say is it's really exciting bringing MPD to market, but the other side of it is something that needs to come off the shelf. So I would just kind of say good practice, of course, is just to cull your range as harshly before a buyer does it. That's always good practice. So we don't think that's working, but we've got some new MPD to bring in, and it's much easier to replace something that's not working with something that is working, rather than get something delisted and get a competitor letting it in. So, don't focus just on the nice stuff. I'm saying it's about let it go. So if something isn't working, just let it go. You always bring it back to market when the time is right, something's right, it's there. It's not waving goodbye to an old friend. It's just kind of replacing it with something that might work better.
Well, thank you for that last thought, Claire. That was very useful. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I'm sure it's been a very insightful session for you all. Our speakers will probably be around for a few minutes afterwards if there's anything else you'd like to ask. But apart from that, I'll bring the session to a close and ask you to thank people in the traditional way. Thank you very much.